Hello everyone, and today I'd like to talk to you about playing a cruiser against battleships. This could be a match with just one or two battleships on the enemy team, maybe a couple like are in the background video that I'm using as an example for this, or maybe you're the only cruiser in the match and you consider yourself the easiest target, and so do they. And these are usually very painful experiences for people. I see a lot of complaints about people trying to survive longer in these matches. Usually players get upset because the battleships just delete them or focus them first because, like I said, they're the easiest target. And overall it's just not a lot of fun. Now I have found ways to help you survive this and actually do a decent amount of damage during these matches to where it's not just pointless suffering for you. I'm not going to say it's the most fun. It can be kind of boring sometimes, and it can be rather tough. It's not going to be the charge in and brawl all the destroyers because you're the biggest thing in the match type gameplay. And it's definitely not going to be sailing around for the entire match because that's just not how you survive against these things. But there are a couple categories that I will use to kind of sum up my thoughts on this and try to help people just adjust their playstyle to actually make them survive in these matches and just be a pure annoyance while also maybe contributing to that victory and getting the extra research and silver lions. To start off, you have to change your mentality, and this is just considering yourself not a big bad cruiser that can just beat up all the smaller ships, because there's something bigger than you that is just going to flatten you outright, many times just by detonating your ammo. So mentality, first things first, don't spawn immediately. Wait for some teammates to spawn in first. You're going to see me repeat this over and over, but you don't want to be the only target, and you don't want to be the first thing that battleship sees because, well, they're going to take the free food. You need to remember that you're not a frontline ship now, you're a support ship for your team and food for these enemy battleships. So you're not going to want to be in the front line and brawling stuff because you're just going to get outright deleted. You want to stay well behind your frontline ships and plan on how to make yourself a hard target to hit. I'll expand on this a little bit later, but it's just something you want to keep in mind, that you're going to want to make yourself almost impossible for these battleships to shoot at unless they just aren't focusing you at all and have no ability to focus you, of course. And like I said, stay way behind your frontline ships. Let the battleships do what they're supposed to do and tank the enemy battleships. Granted, you're still going to get shot at because people will see that the easier target's just behind your battleships, but in turn, with making yourself a hard target to hit, hopefully they'll just leave you alone. You will have a hard time killing battleships though, and they can just outright decimate you. You need to keep this in mind because if you just start shooting at them, it's just going to get their attention, and you're going to find a very large amount of very large shells coming your way very soon. You almost need to play like every salvo of shells is potentially coming your way. If you haven't really figured out how to tell if something's coming in your direction, or you can't really work your mind through all the enemy fire because there's just a ton of it, you need to just play like every single shell that's being fired is potentially coming towards your ship and take measures to avoid them accordingly. You should also take mental notes of good concealment spots on the map where you can still fight for objectives. While you're going to be camping for a lot of my tips here, you still want to be able to support objectives and actually win the match. If you're camping in a spot where, yes, you can damage the enemy team, but say you can't stop a destroyer from taking a cap zone, or maybe firing on a PT boat that's trying to take it, or just helping your teammates actually kill something that's charging down a cap like an enemy battleship, you're really not going to be much use in that match, and you're just going to be getting damage for yourself. And sometimes it's not even that much because usually all the good cover spots are around these objectives. And the last thing I want to say for mentality is remember to support your teammates with anti-aircraft cover, float plane usage, and shelling smaller ships. A lot of these early battleships don't have any anti-aircraft on themselves, So when the enemy team does start spawning planes, you kind of want to be near your teammates that don't have all this, or have a lack of anti-aircraft firepower. Maybe, well, hopefully by that time there isn't a lot of battleships on the enemy team, so you don't have to worry about them as much. But sticking around that, or sticking around, say, your cargo fleet and encounter, is always a good idea to pick up a couple extra plane kills. Float plane usage is pretty self-explanatory. You can use that to go snag some cap zones and really help your team out. And of course, shelling smaller ships is another really helpful thing from the cruisers, because the battleships have those long reloads and coastal boats can be annoying, so taking care of those is kind of part of your job. Moving on from mentality though, let's go on to maneuverability and camping. These may seem weird to group together, but it'll all make sense in a moment. When you start the match, have a destination in mind to get to that will both help limit who can fire on you and allow you to support the most objectives or teammates as possible. You're doing this mainly just to prevent those enemy battleships from getting you in their sights and lobbing shells at you. Obviously, on open maps with no island cover, you can skip this, but you still should be doing your best not to be near the front line of the match or make an easy target of yourself. You want to keep up your maneuverability and you want to stay behind your enemy team, so you're just not an obvious target for those enemy battleships. As you make your way towards your chosen spot though, constantly turn, accelerate, or decelerate to make yourself in a very annoying target to hit. Many players won't even shoot at a ship that is actively maneuvering, or will stop after a few misses, especially these early battleships with their longer reloads. It's many times cruiser players that are used to those shorter reloads, and once they miss a few times and get bored of having to reload for a minute and a half or so, obviously with a couple misses, and just not getting any damage from it, they'll switch targets to something easier, even if it's a harder target like a battleship, because they can at least still hit it. So you want to just keep maneuvering and avoiding enemy fire as best you can. You should also try to avoid situations that leave you in front of your team or as the only ship for enemies to shoot at. Even if you're 20 kilometers away from them, if you're the only target, they are going to lob shells in your direction, even if you are a hard target to hit. Eventually they will catch you. Don't sit still in open water, it just makes you a super easy target even at longer ranges. This is a big issue I see a lot of late cruiser players do against battleships. Even after they get flattened while doing it, they'll respawn, they'll park their ship, and here comes another round of shells from my battleship to just sink you. When you get to your chosen spot, camp. It may be more boring than actively brawling, but it does allow your lighter ship to survive and support your team through the match, which is pretty big because, well, when you're dead, you can't actually do anything to help your team win. Even if you are behind cover, keep constantly moving your ship back and forth in case somebody does get an angle on you. The rule of thumb is if you can see the enemy ship, they can most likely see you. That's kinda how Naval works in these matches. So many times you'll see players park behind these islands and think they're perfectly safe. A battleship will get an angle on them where they could see the tops of their masts or something like that, and suddenly you have a bunch of 12-inch shells coming to plunge down on your cruiser because they can just float them over the island. So just keep maneuvering your ship, even if it's just a little bit, to really throw off their aim in case they are just aiming for your magazines. You don't want to just disappear suddenly because you didn't see the shells coming. If your cover does allow you to fully hide your ship, especially if you are being targeted, use it to hide and utilize your float plane to take objectives for your team. Obviously don't stay in your float plane the entire flight time. You want to keep popping back to your ship, checking to see if you are under fire, and then you can go back to controlling your float plane and going to take objectives. The worst thing you see players do is sailing in open water while flying their float plane around and never switching back, and they come back to a ship that's on the verge of being sunk because it just sails in a straight line or does small circles. So try to be in cover when you're using this. Now, you don't have to camp for the full match. This is one thing that players don't do a good job of remembering. If you see an empty flank or the enemy team has run out of battleships that can threaten you, push out and secure the win. Once those battleships are gone or you have a wide open flank, you are the biggest threat in that match. You can push out and exert your influence to actually take objectives or force the enemy team away from them, or just go sink a bunch of their ships for more point loss. For encounter matches, if you are going to camp, position your ship between the cargo fleet and the enemy plane spawn area, and give your anti-aircraft gunners some free targets while you protect your fleet, presuming you have a decent anti-aircraft complement. Many times you'll see players, as soon as they die, they'll get in a bomber and they'll beeline for that enemy fleet to deal heavy damage to the cargo fleet and secure that win for their team. Those cargo fleets, when they die, I should say, they lose your team a significant amount of points, so that little bit of extra anti-aircraft firepower can go a long way. And that's really all I had for maneuverability and camping. Now the last thing I want to talk about is awareness and target selection. You should always be aware of who can shoot at you. Typically, like I said, if you can see them and target them, they can also target you. And you should try and manage how many battleships, or just enemies in general, can shoot at you. If you can hide from most of them, that is better than all of them being able to target you, because obviously that's a lot of enemies that can put their sights on you and just try to sink you outright. Even with this, like I said before, you should be constantly looking for shells coming in your direction in case you need to shift your speed or position to avoid this enemy fire, or just get away from where they can shoot at you. You should always look for targets that your shells can damage to attack first, as shelling battleships that you struggle to damage only gets their attention and gets a bunch of large shells lobbed in your direction that potentially sink you. You should focus on ships that are pushing objectives, or smaller vessels that can hinder your own team's battleships, like coastal boats or destroyers. If battleships are the only target that you have, or do need to be killed for your team for objective control, try to engage when they're distracted. Even if you can't decimate them, constantly breaking anti-aircraft guns, secondaries, bridges, and even just setting fires on them adds up pretty quickly. You should also utilize your torpedoes if you do have them, as they can heavily damage large ships and outright sink smaller ones. Even if you're just lobbing them across the cap zone towards the enemy team, you'd be surprised at the number of times you'll just get a lucky hit. Speaking of those cap zones, objective control and snowballing, aka knocking enemy teams' ships back to weaker ships, are key ways to win in Naval. Focus your firepower on supporting your teammates to accomplish these, and possibly create opportunities for you to push like you're the top tiered ship in the match. It may be harder to rack up massive damage totals in these matches, but it is still doable as long as you can survive and learn to focus easy targets while supporting your teammates. Ensuring that your firepower is used to support teammates and objectives will go a long way to securing victory, despite your own ship being outclassed. In all, I hope this does help players adjust their playstyle when they are facing down battleships in these cruisers, in order to just survive a little bit longer, like I said, support your team and secure victory, while still getting in as much damage as you can, as sometimes it can be hard in these matches, just because it's very hard to damage battleships with some of these cruisers. Hopefully it helped, hopefully you guys enjoyed, and have a good one. Good luck out there, and I'll see you in the next one.